Good morning, good afternoon, and good day wherever you may be joining us from. Welcome to another edition of the Digital Download, the longest running weekly business talk show on LinkedIn Live, now globally syndicated on the TuneIn Radio Network through IBGR, the world's #1 business, talk, news, and strategy radio network. Today, we're bringing Agile out of IT and into everyday improvement. We have a special guest, Mark Intrican, to help us with the discussion. With over 40 years experience leading teams and organizations through transformation and continuous improvement, Mark has successfully guided numerous teams in adopting agile frameworks, not just for software, but for creating impactful solutions in all aspects of business and life. But before we bring Mark on to the show, let's go around and introduce everyone. And while we're doing that, why don't you in the audience reach out to a friend? Ping them, have them join us. We strive to make the digital download an interactive experience, and audience participation is highly encouraged. All right, with that, Adam, would you kick us off, please?
Hi, everybody. I'm Adam Gray. I'm co-founder of DLA Ignite and his business partner. Tim always says, famous for writing the book. So I think my claim to fame is that I've written like a testimonial paragraph and comment in Tim's book and in Rob's book.
Adam is the most famous testimonial writer ever.
Yeah. There we go.
Yes,
awesome.
We've all got to have something, haven't we? Let's be honest.
Well, thank you, Adam, and welcome. Tim, thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome. Welcome, everybody, and thank you. My name is Tim Hughes, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite, and Adam's business partner. And I always say this, which is why it's part of the joke, that I'm famous for writing the book Social Selling Techniques to Influence Buyers and Changemakers.
Excellent. Thank you. Tracy, good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Calling in from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, where it was 7 o'clock in the morning. Who am I? I'm Tracy Boris, founder of TLB Coaching and events, where we're all about people not doing crazy, stupid marketing, but doing really smart, strategic marketing instead. And I am a proud partner of DLA Ignite, and I have worked in software for quite some time, so I've experienced the Agile methodology in person, and I'm super excited today to see how we can bring that into our everyday business.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We see Bertrand and then we don't, so when he comes on, we'll be sure to introduce him. Bertrand, you are still welcome to join us. Myself, I'm Rob Durant, founder of Flywheel Results, a proud DLA Ignite partner, and I am famous, well, not quite famous, for writing the book, The Social Enablement Blueprint, Stop Pitching and Start Selling. All right. With that, as I said, on the
I think Tim has something to say.
I just have a note from Bertrand on Slack that he's got connection issues and he said he can't join us.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Okay, thank you. This week on the Digital Download, we're speaking with Mark Intrican. Mark will share how Agile can lead to more collaboration and better results, whether you're in the boardroom or at home. So let's bring him on. Mark, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, everyone. How are you this morning? It's great to be here. All these happy faces. You guys are awesome.
Thank you. Mark, let's start by having you tell us a little bit about you, your background, and what led you to where you are today.
Wow, that's a long story, Rob. That may take the whole time. All right, you want a short story. I have been in IT since the 70s and just have loved it so much. It's been a truly awesome learning experience to go from the days, if you remember the little computer cards we used to have to type on those.
Punch cards.
Yes, and going to college with that kind of process was very interesting, and then to see the growth that we are to today. But I have a bachelor's degree in business information systems, a master's degree in organizational management, lots of experience going from company to company as a consultant, learning about the old ways of waterfall and how that worked, but things didn't work well because everything was running too late, couldn't keep up, couldn't keep track of all the processes and the long-term situations that occurred because you had to get everyone involved and had to have meetings. And then I learned about Agile. And I love when people call Agile a methodology because that's not what Agile is. Agile is a framework of rules and processes to put together Scrum, Kanban, DSDM, XP, and all the others. Those are our methodologies of how to use Agile. But Agile is about growing from a baseline that we have, I think, now have taken apart. But we'll go into that in a minute. More about me. I am based out of Denver, Colorado, but currently I am in southern Mississippi with family and enjoying the nice weather down here, high humidity. But it's been a great life, and I'm breaking more now into more speaking and coaching and consulting in the process, helping people with Agile as well as achieving unity or creating unity so we can achieve unity in the workplace and at home.
Excellent.
Thank you very much. So, Mark, I want to start with a foundational question, and I believe you started to address it, but let's get right into it. What is meant by Agile in the IT realm, and what are Agile principles?
Okay, there's 4 principles to Agile, but let's go to the IT world first. Let's kind of talk about that. Because when Agile was written many years ago, it was written for the IT world. Everything was about programming and requirements and software, and it works very well. And I do support companies transitioning from the waterfall world into the agile world because it does work in software. What I have done is moved it a little bit away from the process of being so computer literate to being a little bit more open to how we can use it because we want to get around ideas such as requirements or software and turn software into solutions because what agile does and those 4 principles, I call them the crew: customer collaboration, responding to improvements, empowering individuals and interactions, and working solutions, can be used very well in software, but they can also be used very well in our daily life. So many things that we do are crossed over from the business world to the personal world. Who is our customer? Our customer could be our friend. Who are we working with and who are we building with? That type of collaboration is beneficial for all. And we don't talk enough. We don't share enough. But we want more customer collaboration, more friendly conversation than legal lawyerisms or contract negotiations, as Agile started with. Is it? When I talk about Agile, I'm talking about the manifesto. And I don't know how long you want me to go here on this, Rob, is answering your question. But I'll go just to these last 3 just quickly because you want to be responding to improvements all the time, as far as the second one, over following just plans. You want to respond to improvements over pacifying comfort levels because that's too much of what we do in the waterfall way. We have a comfort level. Somebody, well, we've done this before. I did it at another company. Somebody else did it. And we just follow those processes instead of working on continual process improvement. We want to empower individuals, everyone, empower the individuals, empower the interactions between each of us. We want to do that more also over pacifying those comfort levels in our processes. Working solutions, that goes for all of us in what we do. What we're doing here on this meeting this morning with us. What is our agenda? But we want working solutions over reading nonsense that doesn't make sense to the author either. And that's what we have or had in a lot of our old documentation. That comprehensive documentation, who could read it or who could understand it? If you look at my newsletters out of my site, www.marketingtrinket.com, you'll see I even talk about legalese. And we need to get rid of legalese and put it into Englishese so we can all read and understand the laws that we're supposed to obey.
So, Mark, I've heard you mention waterfall and it's been replaced by Agile, but I have no IT experience.
Okay.
I don't know what you mean by those terms. Is that basically the playbook that you follow for developing software?
Yes, great question. Sorry about that. Thank you. The waterfall way came out of what's called the PMBOK, Project Management Book of Knowledge, PMBOK. And there is a large book, and it still exists. Waterfall still exists, and many companies are still utilizing waterfall on a day-to-day basis. Some people say you can't do agile for everything. Well, everybody has an opinion. So waterfall is the process of doing your SDLC, your software development lifecycle, SDLC. And you go into requirements, you go into design, you go into programming, you go into testing, and you do all those in specific boxes. And one can't start pretty much until the last one has ended. It's just first in, first out, sometimes called FIFO. So in the software process, it's for people who have maybe used some spreadsheet software and written functions in there. You have a field, a column here, and you want something here. You write in there, take A1, multiply it times 4, and that's where it is in column B. That is a theoretical program or function in the simplest of terms. Now, of course, when you get into rocket travel, there's so many more calculations and equations involved in just saying A1 plus 2 is B2, but it's all still an equation that's used to build one from another. And again, that waterfall world, that had to be completed before anything else could be done. And that could take months. The design could take months. The programming could take months. The testing could take months. And it took a long time to get any kind of project completed. So when you're putting this all together and you have these large projects, think of banks, think of rocket science, think of anything a company does, by the time the program is completed, when you've got months and months and months, the software product that they had designed is probably out of date because someone else has completed their project, their program, and it's ahead of yours. So then you go back and you start reprogramming. Anytime you reprogram something, it takes more time. In the Agile philosophy, you're doing more of taking your highest priority to satisfy the customer. You want to do that through rapid and continuous delivery of valuable solutions, not just software. So what that means let's take it in what's called the Scrum world, which is a method that we use within Agile, the methodologies. You put together daily stand-ups to go through what you've written of those requirements, which are started with stories. And Rob, one of the things, well, all of you, but one of the things that we have problem with today is us all understanding a term and then someone not wanting to change the term. So using that word stories, for example, you write, as a user, I want this so that you have your what, when, and why. So who, what, and why. So you want to make sure you find a result to the process. So in the Scrum world, within the Agile, which again, you're getting your highest priority first, you put together 4 ceremonies. One of them is to create those stories in a way that you say, who's the user? I want, what do you want? And then why? Why do you want it? So as you're putting it together, you're solving that why in the process.
Can
And
you give us that story framework again, please?
Keep the story framework. Okay. The story is
as
a whoever you are. Who's the person that wants this? Are you an engineer? Are you a customer coming into a retail store? Are you a parent wanting your child to do something? Who is the person that's making this request? And sometimes it can be called a requirement, but we take it as a story to ease it up a little bit. But as a end user,
ideal target audience, end user, sure.
I want, what do you want? I want your room clean. I want a new field on my screen and I want it red. I want it to take numbers. There's all kinds of things you can put with it. So
I want to pause there.
Please.
I like that because in sales, so often we talk about people's pain point. What's the problem? That doesn't talk to me about the problem. That talks about my ideal desired end state. What do I want? Well, of course, I want the problem solved, but what do I want out of that? So I like that. I want, and then what was that third element of the story?
So that, what's your why? What you're putting it together for. I want so that I can enter account numbers. I can get the toys off my floor. I can do whatever I need to do to complete the what for that entity, that person. I want to keep some of the larger words out, but the as a that user, that
Please keep the
customer.
larger words out. I'm simple.
So as that end user, I want whatever it is I want. What's the value? What's the solution? Where is the value? Where's the value? And then so that here's what I want the end result to be. And it goes, well, it doesn't matter why, but yes, it does matter why, because as we get into the why of what we're doing something, we can all pitch in and continue to pitch in about what we're accomplishing and why we're accomplishing it so we can improve it. So again, we have those stories to start with, and then we have what's called story review. And we
Well,
go through
before
those.
you go into the story review, let's stick with story for a minute. Tracy,
Okay.
I want to bring you in here.
Yeah.
You said you have background working with IT organizations, and I know you like a good story.
I do love a good story.
Tell me
This
a
is-
little bit about what you heard. Were you ever exposed to this plan of action?
Okay, so what I'm experiencing as Mark is explaining the difference between waterfall and agile is that I think the software organization I was working for was using the waterfall methodology, but calling it agile and like using a Kanban board and Scrum, which are agile methodologies in the waterfall principles. So now I'm honestly a little bit confused about what's going on there. Because this is actually like for quite some time, I became like a default product manager for the product because I was responsible for the marketing of it and telling the story. I did all of the customer interviews and onboarding and all of those types of things. And story has always been important to me. So I was like constantly trying to pull the story out of this. But like we did not have this story formula that we used for any of the development that we did. And I'm thinking right now, like, how does stuff even get done the way if you don't know the story? Because you get caught up. I remember having this conversation, like it took days going back and forth as to like what color this button should be on the site, right? And I'm like, I mean, we need a button to do the thing, but like, who cares what color the button is? Or we could test the color of the button to see if it makes it easy. Like, why are we spending so much time? And like, if we had tried to put a story together for the color of this button, I'm pretty sure we couldn't have come up with any kind of reasonable story for who it's creating value for and what end result they're going to get. So I'm just very excited about this. And even from a like business perspective, like most of the work I do now is trying to help marketing teams convert from a cost center into a performance, like a revenue engine. And like this story, folks, this is the why. Why do you do that? Why do you want a revenue generating engine out of your marketing? Do you care? Or is it just because someone told you at some point that you should do it? I think there's like figuring out your real why, connecting it to a customer need, right? Like it's clearly the beginning part of the process, but I feel like it's being missed a lot of the time.
Well,
and I think that hints to the topic for today. We're bringing those agile elements out of the IT department and pointing out where everyone can actually apply that.
And Rob, can I touch on something that?
Absolutely. Go for it.
Good. Touch on something. Tracy makes a lot of great points in what she was talking about, because so many people, and of course there are 99 companies probably that has a Scrum certification or Agile certification or Kanban certification or XP certification, and everyone does it differently. And she made a lot of good points of how each company, and sometimes departments within companies want to do it differently. They don't think things all the way through the process to where they're using the stories themselves to solve their own story problem. I think she made a lot of good points there, but I hadn't heard of that before. And that's so loud in what she's saying, and she's right, because that story has got to be the start of what you're doing. And it doesn't matter what you call it, some people want to call it different things, but that story of as a first, who needs this? What do they need and why do they need it? She mentioned that color. That goes right back into the process of someone has to be the one that decides that color, and they need to get together in those and then vote. And that's what we do in the story planning is you get into the process of saying, what do we want? And then when it comes down to the color, who decides the color? We get together and we say, we're in, that's in the story requirement, story process, and you say, who is the person here and why do they want this? That's the so that, and that's where that color comes about. Am I making sense?
Sure.
Yes.
Adam, I think I interrupted you earlier. I apologize.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, in the run up to this, I did a little bit of googling. Now, obviously, anyone that gets to my age has heard terms like Agile and Scrum and Waterfall and yada yada, all of these different terms. So I thought, I thought the premise of the conversation today was a really interesting one. You know, using these techniques outside of their normal usage. So I thought I need to kind of educate myself a little bit. So I did a bit of research into what Agile is, and there's a load of terms there that are kind of very software focused. But it said Agile is a good choice for projects where managers can't know all the details at the beginning, projects span large timeframes, there's a high risk of unexpected concerns. And I thought about my experience in the workplace, and I thought, well, that's kind of like everything that happens in the workplace, because you start being largely ignorant of what it is that you're buying or doing, and then as you go through the process of starting to implement that change project, whatever function of the business it's in, you learn stuff and you realize, oh, that preconception I had at the beginning actually doesn't fit as well as this idea that I now have, and that further develops as you go through it. And I thought, actually, this is a really interesting metaphor for how life works. You know, because you go to school, you study something, and what you study you think is going to lead you to place A, and none of us ended up where we thought we would end up when we were 18 years old. We've all ended up somewhere entirely different because as we have learnt things, as we have gone through the process of deploying changes in our education, in our career, in our workplace, in our projects, we've learnt more stuff, and we've thought, actually, I'm now starting the journey to that destination. Well, the destination has changed maybe, but certainly the route to get there has changed. So this seems like this is a perfect way to manage your own life, your career, your everything you do.
Adam, that is so well said.
Well said.
I'm off now.
I have a question about that though, because I feel like, especially from a software perspective, there's a defined product of some sort. So there's kind of this idea that we're finished something, which is why I think there is it's still almost a tendency to think waterfall, right? Like, I'm going to come up with this, and so I'm going to create the scope, and I'm going to do the things, and then I'm going to get the thing. But as Adam said, life doesn't work that way, right? We learn, we grow, scope changes. This is why there's terms like scope creep that exist. And so what would you say, Mark, is there like a mindset shift or something that we need to make in this concept of like a product or a solution being finalized versus like we're opening the door to something that has every intention of being continuous improvement?
Tracy, that's awesome, and thank you for leading me into that, because that's part of the things. If we look at the Scrum, which is the methodology from the Agile framework, Scrum puts us into the point of putting those stories together. And the word I was losing a few minutes ago is story refinement. You're always refining your stories, but then you have those stories, and then you pick a period, or it's called a sprint or an iteration, to complete a specific selected amount of stories. This is what you do on a period by period, sprint by sprint basis. So in the Scrum part, using the Agile Manifesto as your framework, the methodology itself is using Scrum so that you have a daily stand-up, you have a review at the end of the sprint, then you have a retrospective in the process. I'm forgetting one of them. There's four of them. There's four ceremonies in there. You have your daily stand-up that you go through every day. You spend 15 minutes and you talk about what each one of those stories, what have you done? What was done yesterday? What do you plan to do today? And what are your impediments or your roadblocks? You go through it to find out what each of those are every day to make sure you're accomplishing something. So by the end of that sprint, generally a sprint is considered 2 weeks. It can be 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 weeks, but you define that right up front. So each of those stories has to be able to be completed, broken down, the minimum viable product or service, so it can be completed in that sprint. They'll usually do 2 weeks. And so you get those done, and at the end of that sprint, you go through what's called a review. Some call it a demo, but it's a review because there's more discussion. And we'll talk about that in the retrospective in just a second. But at the end of that, you do a review of it, and in the review, you're showing what's completed. So you're showing the child, showing the parent the room. Here's what's completed, and I've got what I've completed in my room. Most of those should be done in a day, and that's okay. But some may be longer. In a software product, you're wanting something done on your screen. You want that field completed. You want it to do something. So at the end of that sprint, you show your end user, the as a, what is accomplished. And not only that, during that sprint, you're showing your completion ratio through that daily stand-up. I want that field on my screen. So you're saying I'll have that field on my screen done in half to 3 days. And you're showing them how much you've done on a daily basis, and then when it's done. Then of course you have situations where there's dependencies from sprint to sprint, but that goes into the process. But that's what you're doing in there on all of those stories, getting them done in that sprint, 1, 2, 3, 4 week period, no longer than, usually 2 weeks. But at the end of that sprint, what you have also after your review is called a retrospective. And in that retrospective, you looked at what worked of all those stories that you put together, how many of them did you complete, what didn't work, how many didn't complete, and then why. And you may even create stories at the end of that retrospective to fix the problems that didn't work during that last sprint. So that retrospective is very important. So you're putting these together, you're doing all of your work during that sprint, that iteration, and that's usually that 2 week period, and you have those identified stories where the as a, the end user, whoever that might be, can say, yes, that's not done, yes, it is done, or wait a minute, I thought I said the color was blue, you gave me a light blue. It's still blue, but that just shows that the refinement of that story was not done well enough to clarify what color blue that you may have wanted. That's why you also had that retrospective at the end of your sprint.
So, Mark, I want to bring this out of an IT-centric realm. But let me make sure I understand. If I heard you correctly, waterfall was the method of developing software that was very linear. We do A until A is complete. We don't look at B. Agile, which what I used to think was just willy-nilly. We take care of the loudest problem first, actually has some intent behind it. So
Yes,
now I'm
very
thinking
much.
in the world of business change in general. Why do traditional change management methods often fail?
That's the basis of what Agile and Scrum and Kanban and XP and DSDM, all of them come from. because you may have a requirement, but you've got all this design in the requirement, and I think it was Adam was saying earlier, something changes along the way. Well, when you've got something that large and something changes, the impact to the rest of the process is many times overlooked. Too many times, waterfall is a seed to procrastination because you can always put it off. You got 3 months to do this. So for the first 2 months, 2.5 months, you're kind of throwing things together, but it's those last 2 weeks, and that's where the big overtime came in of getting them done. So in the Agile Scrum, and then the only difference between the Scrum and the Kanban is Kanban, it doesn't have the full cycle of all the ceremonies of the story creation, the story refinement, the daily stand-up, things like that. Kanban just looks at are we doing today, what's done, what's in test, or what's being worked on, what's in test, and what's done. But that's the process of you're completing these stories, these requirements on a day-to-day, sprint-to-sprint basis. Where more in the waterfall, you could have things stretch out for, again, months before you see any value. And then you have to look at, well, what's the value now that the months have passed, or when you're using the more the agile philosophy of the highest priority to satisfy the customer through rapid and continuous delivery of valuable solutions. That rapid and continuous delivery is what makes the difference between using Agile and using Waterfall.
Help me map that over to other business operations. I'm a sales leader, and we're going to change our go-to-market practices, and nobody wants to change the way we're doing things. Or I am an HR leader, and we are going to change our business practices regarding remote work. Change management is typically difficult and often fails. What can I learn from the agile process and put it into 12-year-old speak for the rest of the organization?
Well
for
said.
Tim.
Okay, first on that process, you said let's just take one of them, HR, whatever. You're going to
Sure.
you're going to make some, and one of the things we look at is, or that I preach on, is a change is short term and improvement is long term. We have to make changes in the process, but we'll make sure that change is part of the improvement. But let's say you're taking an HR and you have a program that's going to happen in 3 months, 12 months. You don't use that waterfall process of saying, well, here's some things that we're going to do and we'll get them done in 3, 6, 12 months. And then 2, 5, or 11 months later, you're not done. You're not where you want to be. If you use the Agile manifesto for the framework, you're going to take the HR project and say, what are we going to do? Then we take all things we want to do and then we break them down into the smallest viable product or service. So you want to HR and you say, well, we want to talk to our employees more. Okay, well, boom, there's a story. As a manager, I want to talk to my employees more so that, why do you want to talk to them more? You break it down. They say, well, there's several reasons. Boom, there's multiple stories. And then you complete those again in that 1, 2, 3, no more than 4-week period. You put that process of what you're going to do in that new HR program and you break it down so that it's achievable. Each one of those stories, each one of those requirements, each one of those needs, each one of those wants, that it's completed in that period. And then you have all those things that build up.
Measurement come in? Where does measurement come in the process, especially outside of the IT world? How do you know if you're on the right track, and how do you know when you need to maybe modify the track?
Beautiful, beautiful story. It's a situation of what we call story points. And didn't go into this earlier. But when you create a story as I want, so that you look at the difficulty or the complexity of that story, of that requirement. And in the Agile philosophy, the Agile manifesto, it doesn't get into time. And a lot of people, when they go into Scrum, they say it doesn't get into time. But the only problem with that is time is our only definite. So you do have to do time, and you want to. But when you do the story and you do story pointing, those are approximate points. So one point would be a very minor change. It would mean it would take me half a day to do a one pointer. It would be, and some people are going to fight this because no, you don't want to put time in there because they didn't put time in Agile, and that's true. But everything comes down to the time. So you might say about a half a day. That means it could take 1 hour, it could take 5 hours, but you have a time limit on how long it's going to take you to get that done. And that's why in that daily stand up, you every theoretical morning, when you get together and say, I worked on this, got this done, here's my impediments, here's my problems. You want to do that on a daily basis to see what you're accomplishing, and you do that based on those points I'm talking about to say, okay, I rated that as a 3 point. I expect that to be done in a day and a half. It actually took me 2.5 days, so my pointing was wrong, my measurement was wrong. Or it could be that, hey, I got it done in a day, so I'm working on something else. And in your sprint, in your iteration, in that sprint planning, you have multiple stories to work on. So that say it only took you an hour and a half, you've got another story right there to jump right into and start working on that you measured again with those points. That's where your measurement comes in. I'm going through a lot of things there, but to answer your question on the timing, every story has points to measure about how long it's going to take. But the benefit to it is you're going to have 1, 2, 3 stories, maybe up to 4 or 5 maximum in a sprint, because you get too many stories, you get back into the waterfall way of just too much going on and it's hard to keep up with everything. But you know that during that sprint, you're going to have a couple, 3 stories to work on. You complete early, you go ahead and start the next one. If it takes a bit longer, then you make sure you will log that, talk about that in the retrospective at the end, but you do what you can to get those stories accomplished and complete what you can. And if you don't get something done, then you make another story to complete it in the next sprint.
So, Tracy, you said you've done some product management, and no doubt you've been part of just change management within organizations. How does your experience with those align to what Mark was saying regarding the agile methods that he was discussing?
I'm okay. So the example that I'm thinking of is CRM implementation, which I think, like, from a
That's
marketing
relationship management.
perspective, yeah, and it's like these things are always. I've never actually seen one that's been run as agile. Like, every single one has been structured as waterfall. Like, we have this CRM, we're moving it to this CRM, we have to take the data out of this one, we have to build the data structure in this one, we have to input the data into that one, and that's very, like, linear process. And then what happens almost every single time is that the new CRM looks exactly like the old CRM, and people don't use it any differently, except we spent $50,000 in doing this switchover. But when I think about that, I'm like, as you're talking, Mark, I'm just thinking of, like, all of the things, all of the projects, all of the changes, all of the product design that I've been through that do not have stories. And I feel like this is the big missing piece. And I don't know if it's just like I'm taking all of the notes, and maybe it's just because I, like, identify as a storyteller, but, like, even this concept of story pointing, right? Like, I'm imagining the story being the 3 little pigs. Right? The 3 little pigs. There's the beginning of the story. There's the end of the story. There's stuff that happens in the middle. But there's a straw house, and there's a log house, and there's a brick house, and there's a big bad wolf, and there's, like, points of the story. Right? And when we are telling the story, we know if we've missed a point, right? Like, we can tell that we've missed the point because we know what the story is supposed to be. And when we're talking about nursery rhymes and fairy tales, then maybe that seems easy to understand. But when we look at our business process and improvements and changes, like, do we actually know the story? Like, who is this for? And, like, and to address your question too, Rob, like, how do we track that we're going there? Because I can also track in software that we've delivered a lot of features. I can deliver a lot of features and not go anywhere on a story front. And so, like, how do we make sure that it's actually coming back to something that is going to add value and have that rapid and continuous improvement? Because, sorry, I'm just, like, thinking all the things. This is just
makes some
so
great
genius.
points.
It's so genius because, like, one, what other department? I would love if someone is watching this show and they actually have a department that's not IT, who runs on 2-week sprints, who can actually show the business that you are getting something done in 2 weeks.
Right.
Because I would say I have not seen a marketing department that does that. We would be lucky in general to show someone in a year what we have done.
Exactly.
Like, that's nuts. And if you're an HR, which was the example you guys were giving, and like you actually wanted to, you were the management team and you knew why you wanted to hear more from your employees, wouldn't you want to be able to prove to the organization that you did something about it in the last 2 weeks? Like, I mean, I know that doesn't necessarily mean we complete like the whole novel, right? But we complete the stories as we go. And how then my brain says, like, oh, when people are like have software companies that are startups and they are like making all of these milestones for the business and they're saying we're going to develop this feature. Who cares?
And-
Shouldn't we know what the story is that
And-
the
and
people
Tracy-
are getting out of that?
If I could add to that, because I left out one part of it, every story has what's called acceptance criteria. So that when that story is being worked on, there's certain acceptance criteria they're measured by. And when the story's done, all of that acceptance criteria, like you're saying, your end user working in HR and in the CRM, they know what that acceptance criteria is when they turn it over to software team, whoever they're turning it over to, what that acceptance criteria is, and that's acceptance criteria that's checked off when it's done. So at the end of that 2-week period, they know what's going to be done and what they will have to use that next day.
Well, and I think
Tim,
too,
Adam,
sorry, I
I
just want to share a quick thing about like how I see that in marketing, because like it still sounds like kind of a software type of example, but like if we are trying to create digital ads, right? Like, one, let's set up the story of why we're trying to create digital ads. But then if we have these like really clear acceptance criteria that allow us to all understand when this story is making progress, right? Then we're actually tracking against the story. Now we have data points. Again, like Rob, you were talking about, we have data points and they're unique for each story, but we have data points, acceptance criteria to track that. And that is relevant for any kind of business work product.
Okay,
Tim
let
and
me
Adam,
add.
I wanted to ask.
Go ahead. Yeah, thanks.
Tracy talked about implementing a new CRM, and at the end of the day, the new CRM looked just like the old CRM. I know in your past experience, you both worked for an organization where you sold large software products. What did it look like on the other side of that relationship where they were implementing something and they had to deal with change management? And were they looking to you for support on the steps throughout the process, or was it sold and done? What did you observe? And maybe where could these agile methodologies have helped support the sale?
I think that yes, and I think from what Adam read out earlier on, most definitely Agile can help within non-IT environments. And from what Mark has explained, most definitely, there's a very clear structure here to support change, because change is, if moving one CRM to another CRM is relatively simple. Okay, you're going to spend $50,000 and you've got to move these bits, the IT and the data across, but actually it can be done. The big difference is actually getting people to use the CRM in the first place, which is a change, has change consequences. Moving people from I'm not filling in the CRM because it means nothing to me to I can't wait to wake up in the morning and fill the CRM in is okay, you might not quite get them to people like that.
Said no one ever.
Yeah, but
I've never heard anybody say that.
but that change is fundamental to getting people to use the system, and so what Mark's saying is spot on. Yeah.
But also, I think it speaks to the difference between the change and the improvement that Mark outlined, right? Like, we can change a lot of things, and just by changing something doesn't necessarily mean that it's an improvement. So how are we making sure that if we're going to go through the effort of the change, even if it's a seemingly small change, but I mean, for some companies I've worked with, a $50,000 CRM shift is a big change. And so if we're going to do that, we do want to make sure it's an improvement. What is the story that will make that an improvement instead of just a switch?
Yeah.
Very well said. And if we could just take it out to something simple, and everything does break down to something simple, even rocket flights. But let's just take a child cleaning their room. You say, son, daughter, whatever, go clean your room. Okay. The son or daughter goes in there and moves some toys around. Okay. Well, that toy movement was cleaning the room to the child. Well, that's probably not what the parent wanted. But the process is in the Agile manifesto, you want to talk about the team, the solution delivery team must work together daily throughout each iteration, each sprint to value accountability and responsibility based on those stories and that acceptance criteria. So, what do you want your CRM to do? Where is that improvement? You make those small changes, as Tracy's saying along the way, to build up to that improvement. So again, the delivery team must work together daily throughout the iteration to value accountability and responsibility. That child needs to vacuum the floor, pick up the toys, so wipe off the desk, whatever it may be. And that's the same thing for putting a rocket ship together. And I have worked on with companies in Lockheed Martin in that process. It's all breaking everything down into a minimum viable product or service. What does that CRM need? What does that HR team need? Break it down and make those stories completable based on that acceptance criteria.
I want to come back to the sales perspective. That's my bias. That's my bent. Adam, as one who sold large software deals, did you already have in place some form of helping your customers with the change versus improvement? And if so, what was it? And if not, do you see value there for a salesperson?
There's a lot of ways with the sale because what part of the sales process are you? Because if you're selling software, are you selling a full package or are you selling an improvement to a package? So yes, that part of this is something that is changed, which is a short term, and it's something you're going to end up.
Adam, the question was actually directed at you.
Right.
So,
Apologies.
Ask me the question again.
Regarding change versus improvement, what is the seller's responsibility in that regard? And did you take that responsibility? Did you have practices in place to help you with that? And if not, do you see value in doing so?
I think that the challenge that you have is that every buyer is different, and I think to invest a huge amount of effort in engaging with the buyer around a product or a sale runs the risk of you formulating all of your strategies based on an interaction with one individual organization. So I see this methodology as being a fantastic way of streamlining internal practices, either within your own organization or within your own life, as a way to go from where you are to where you think you may want to go. And I think
Right.
that's the key part, isn't it? It's like when you set out on the journey, you know you're heading east. You don't actually know where you're heading, but you know you're heading east. And as you go down the road, you redefine what your objectives are, because you can't possibly have for a complex thing, you can't have all of the information at the beginning. And certainly I would see real risks in terms of me engaging with Rob as a buyer and me formulating all of my sales strategy on how Rob responds to what it is that I'm trying to do. Now, clearly, you may completely disagree with that, and you might go, "Well, the customer's always right," and yet, but I think that so often what we see is we see organisations and individuals looking for a one size fits all. I had the following conversation with Rob, and therefore that's how the conversation will play out with everybody. And I think that that's probably an unreasonable expectation.
Mark, we have time for one more question. So I want to bring this from IT, from business, down to the very personal individual level. How can Agile help with things like personal productivity and time management?
One of the biggest, I love that question too, because we all encounter this wonderful term called procrastination. We put things off. And one of the biggest foundations of Agile is simplicity, maximizing the amount of work not required is essential. Maximizing the amount of work that's not required is essential to how you accomplish whatever project, task, program that you have in front of you. What are you doing that is essential? And what are you doing that's more of the old waterfall? Well, we need meetings. Well, there are meetings in Agile, whether you Scrum, Kanban, any of them, but they're effective first, efficient second. So the art of maximizing the amount of work not required is so essential in what we do to achieve the goal that we have in front of us.
I think Tracy might disagree.
Tracy.
I wish that Restream had like a confetti thing that you could throw when people say stuff, because this is like, I say this all the time. It's like I was having a conversation with my husband yesterday because he was on the phone at like 5:30 with his leader who is in Eastern time. So it's like 7:30 p.m. And then he was like, oh yeah, my VP was saying she was doing work at like 12 o'clock at night. And I was like, why are people doing these things? It's like we have no desire for personal productivity anymore. And we just like do stuff to make it look like we're so important and we're so busy. And like most of it doesn't do anything. It doesn't contribute to a story. I can tell you that, unless your story is that I'm only important if I'm busy working all the time. But like, what story, where's the value? Who receives value from that story?
Well, that's what, and my better half works in the propane industry, and they're taking the tanks to fill the tanks. How much of that process are they actually accomplishing something, breaking everything down to that minimum viable product or service so they can then maximize the effectiveness of what they're doing? And a lot of people don't want that accountability, and that's what I mentioned earlier, value, accountability, and responsibility, which challenges a lot of people beyond their comfort level, right?
There we go.
Man, I just feel like Mark and I are going to be best friends after today.
There you go. Awesome. Yet another relationship built on the download.
We could do this.
Mark, this has been great. Where
I
can
have
people
loved
learn more? How can they get in touch with you?
The best way, and again, that's what my background had. I couldn't get my background up today, but the best way is to get me at mark@markentrican.com as the email, or go to www.markentrican.com, or call me at 303-FOCUSED, 303-362-8733, because we all have to be reality focused to reach the goals that we have set in front of us.
Awesome.
Excellent.
We now have a newsletter. Don't miss an episode. Get episode show highlights, get beyond the show insights, and reminders of upcoming episodes. You can scan the QR code on screen or visit us at digitaldownload.live/newsletter. On behalf of the panelists, to our guest Mark, and to our audience, thank you all for being a part of the Digital Download, and we'll see you next time.